I guess it's about time to start, according to that PA. Anyway, we want to talk about the SR-71, of course. That's why everybody's here. We appreciate that, and want to thank the AirZoo staff. First of all, thank you for all your support in being here. My name is Tom Danielson. I flew the SR-71 and the U-2 along with a couple other guys here, but my favorite was the SR, of course. The only sustained, and I underline that, Mach 3 airplane ever. So there are other Mach 3 airplanes, but they can't hold a candle to this one. The AirZoo's B model, AirZoo's B model is the single most important SR-71 in the entire fleet because it's the only trainer left for pilot upgrades. So if anything happened to that airplane when we were flying it, the whole program would have stopped. So this is the single most important SR-71 in the world. I propose we're going to have a video tribute to Kelly Johnson, Michigan-born Kelly Johnson. And we'll do a panel introduction, and then a short SR-71 presentation, and then we'll involve all of you with questions and answers. And the quality of our eventual product is as good as the questions that are being asked. Thanks very much. If you can hold your questions to the end, I appreciate that. Michigan-born Kelly Johnson, if you don't know or are not aware, is probably the world's greatest airplane designer of all time. He started his career in the P-38, the twin-engine fighter over there during World War II. He next flew or designed the F/P-80 first jet fighter in the military. Then he designed the F-104 Starfighter, the first Mach 2 fighter in the world. Short wings, known as the missile with the man in it, if you will. Then he he designed the U-2. The airplane flew 7 months after he designed it. And finally, the SR-71 over here. From contract signing to first flight on the airplane was 22 months, which is unheard of. And I know the Air Force, in their wisdom, offered to set up program offices in Lockheed Skunk Works building, and Kelly said, "Stay out of my way." He says, I've delivered every single airplane ahead of schedule and under budget, which he did. By the way, before we really start, I want to thank 5 groups of people. One is the air staff, or the AirZoo staff here. Second one is everybody that's attending here. Thank you very much. This is the reason that we're here. The reason that we come all halfway across the country is to, be able to talk to you folks about an airplane that was retired 32 years ago. So you still like the airplane. We love the airplane. Thirdly, I'd like to thank one individual who got me into the program, I believe, Buzz Carpenter, who's sitting in the audience right now, and he knows that I feel this way, but thanks, Buzz, for, helping me get in this program, the greatest of all programs in the world. Second of all, I want to thank Jerry Glasser, the world's greatest instructor pilot. I learned so much on one flight in this B model from Jerry Glasser that I was able to use on operational missions that I just can't thank him enough. He's a good friend as well. And finally, I want to thank my wife, Chris. She makes me a better person. So anyway, thanks so much. And I'd like to do a letter to Kelly. This was made in 1987 from some footage previous to that. It's about 8 minutes long, and I think it'll give you a good synopsis of the SR-71 program.
Dear Kelly, you and I have never met. I'm not a former SR-71 pilot or RSO. I wasn't a member of your design team at the Lockheed Skunk Works or on the assembly line that built the Blackbird. Nor was I a member of the Air Force at Beale, Mildenhall, or Kadena, who kept the Blackbirds flying. I'm not even an airplane buff in the classic sense. I'm just a person that had the privilege of being around your SR-71 Blackbird, and it was an experience I will remember intensely for the rest of my life. There's just something about your Blackbird, Kelly, that words don't adequately describe. Anyone who has been near a Blackbird and felt its presence knows what I'm talking about. It's a feeling in your gut, and instantly you want to be part of it. Part of what I call the Blackbird family. Today, Kelly, you are being honored for your design work on the SR-71, and justly so. To me, the SR-71 is not only your greatest aircraft design, it is perhaps the greatest aircraft ever built. I've heard it said that you considered the Blackbird the most fascinating challenge of your career. No wonder. It was a design that was so advanced that everything that touched it had to be new. New manufacturing processes, new tools, new materials, a whole new approach. You built an operational stealth aircraft a decade before most of the world had even heard the term. It was a design so far ahead of its time that it retired before time could catch up with it. In times of crisis, the Blackbird provided 6 presidents with a unique and critical view of the world. The Blackbird served this country for just over a quarter of a century. In that entire time, it stood in a class of one. To me, the Blackbird is much more than a technical marvel. It's an airplane that gets inside you, an aircraft that causes the adrenaline to flow just by looking at it. Kelly, your Blackbird is the stuff dreams are made of. It's the model plane sitting in a young child's room, proof that everything is possible, that the sky isn't the limit. And it's the poster hanging on the office wall of a middle-aged engineer, testimony that yes, even in the real world, miracles do occur. The SR-71 embodies all that excites people about aerospace. Its crew seems part pilot, part astronaut. The Blackbird itself appears part airplane, part spacecraft. The typical Blackbird fan is a cross-section of America. It's your grandfather, your niece, your son. It's the wide-eyed young kid that buys an aircraft book at the National Air and Space Museum. It's the family that traveled hundreds of miles to an air show just to see a Blackbird in person. It's the people on the Air Force Base that stopped what they were doing to watch an SR take off. Everyone, every time, no matter how many times they'd seen it before. And it's the pilot who last flew the Blackbird 20 years ago, who has the look in his eye that says, I flew the best aircraft ever made. The look that can barely contain the desire to get in an SR just one more time and light the burners. When Blackbird 972 made its final record-setting flight to Dulles Airport, I watched the television with mixed emotions. This was the Blackbird's final flight. An aircraft that was the very definition of speed and power would fly no more. But my sadness was tempered by the knowledge that this plane would now truly belong to the nation, coming to rest in the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum. Now millions would be able to do what I had done, be near a Blackbird, be part of the family. Kelly, in the years to come, whenever I want to experience your airplane's majesty, I will remember the time I spent with your Blackbird, the smell of JP7 fuel, the feel of it on the soles of my shoes, the sound of an air starter wind up, the TEV ignite, and I'll put on the film that we shot during those incredible weeks in 1987. I'll watch it, feel it, be part of it again. Because in movies, Kelly, like in our memories, your Blackbird will fly forever. Congratulations, Kelly, and thank you. Devin Hawker, assistant cameraman, Blackbird, the movie.
There may be some questions that come to mind after the movie, but please hold those until the end. Remember what they are. Thank you. Your panel members tonight are Doug Soifer. Raise your hand, Doug. Ed Yielding. Dave Burns. Mike Zimmerman, and finally, Steve Justice. So, we have a fabulous panel, along with world record holders and the crew chief of this particular airplane. So, we have a lot of expertise on this panel. So, don't hesitate to ask questions at the end. Doug Soifer, obviously, crew picture is proving that he did indeed fly the SR-71. So,
I look the same, don't I? Is it on now?
use the other one.
How about this one? Okay. And I want to mention everyone to tell me I look exactly the same from 35 years ago. You want us to introduce ourselves? Oh, okay, real quick. I was in the program for 5 years, 85 to 90. Then I went to Air Command and Staff College, which is a one-year school. Then I spent 4 years at the Pentagon. And then my last 4 years in the Air Force, I was down at Fort Walton Beach at Herbal Field with Air Force Special Operations Command, which is a very cool community also. Not like the Recce community, but very enjoyable. Then I spent 16 years with Boeing and retired now.
Next slide. Ed Yielding, notice at the bottom, world record flight. Ed is a good friend and a great SR-71 pilot. Ed?
Thank you, Tom. Ed Yielding from Florence, Alabama. I was 15 years old in 1964 when President Johnson announced the existence of the Blackbird. I thought, man, I'd love to fly that airplane someday. So it's a dream come true. Went to Auburn University, majored in electrical engineering. Then I flew the F-4 Phantom, the RF-4, and the fighter version of the F-4 Phantom for 9 years. And finally was selected for my ultimate dream assignment, the SR-71 Blackbird. And of course, had my first flight in this very airplane with B.C. Thomas, who sadly could not be with us today. He was my instructor. And then in my fifth flight in the Blackbird was my check ride in this very airplane, the B model. We all love the B model. After a couple of years of flying the Blackbird, I was upgraded to instructor and flew in the back seat of the B model, which we love. After 4.5 years in the crew force at Beale, I was selected to be one of the 2 test pilots down at Palmdale, California, flying test missions in the 972 Blackbird. And after it was retired in 1990, I went to Andrews Air Force Base and flew VIPs out of Washington for 5.5 years, and really enjoyed that assignment too. And after 23 years, I retired from the Air Force and flew Northwest Airlines for 11 years, and retired as a Delta pilot after Delta acquired Northwest Airlines. Really good to be with you today.
Thanks. Steve Justice, in the SR-71 program, I was a senior engineer and historian for Lockheed Skunk Works. Like everyone else, we've had successful careers after the SR-71, but Steve?
So first of all, thanks for coming out today. So yeah, I'm the nerd of the panel, and I get to hang out with the cool kids, which is really awesome for me. While I did not get to participate in the design of the Blackbird, I got to work with a number of the skunks, as we call them, the grandfathers of the skunk works that did. And I am incredibly thankful for that. I spent 33 years in the skunk works out of about a 39-year career in defense aerospace. And now I get to travel around the U.S. and sit with the cool kids at the cool table and tell stories about one of the most incredible airplanes ever made.
Thanks, Steve. By the way, we keep talking about Skunk Works. If anybody has any questions about that, it actually comes from an old cartoon in the newspaper called Little Abner. And because the Skunk Works, or because Lockheed Advanced Development Projects had things that smelled so bad, they smelled like the Skunk Works in the cartoon, which was a still. It smelled really bad, so therefore one of the engineers came up with the idea, it smells like Skunk Works. It therefore became the Skunk Works. Dave Burns is an absolute maintenance expert. Sorry about that. He was the crew chief of this airplane, 956. Dave?
I don't know where you got that picture. That's a pretty good one. Yes, I was the crew chief on this aircraft for 4.5 years at Beale Air Force Base in California. I came to the program in 1974. I'd come out of my first assignment was Ramstein Air Base, Germany, on working T-33s, then Cannon Air Force Base, New Mexico, working the F-111D models. Then I got assignment to Beale, came there, come on the Blackbirds, And after 4.5 years, I was sent to Okinawa for 3 years at our detachment in Okinawa, Kadena, working the SR. After I left there, I went to Spangdahlem Air Base in Germany, which is a beautiful assignment. It's in the Eifel Mountains in the western part of Germany near the Luxembourg border. And I worked F4Es and Gs. And then from there, I went to Davis Mountain Air Force Base in Tucson, Arizona, working the OA-37 and then later the OA-10s, my last airplane being the A-10. I retired as a Master Sergeant in 1990. Then I worked as an A&P mechanic for a company called Servair. We were a customs maintenance contractor for U.S. Customs aircraft along the border out of Tucson. And then from there, I went to the Boneyard, worked 7 years in the AMARC, the aircraft storage facility at Tucson. In 1999, moved back to St. Louis area, St. Louis, Missouri, and I worked for Mid-Coast Aviation and Jet Aviation, working corporate aircraft, the Bombardier Challengers, the Globals, Falcon jets, and also Gulfstream series of aircraft. So and I retired in 2013, and so now we're just retired. My wife and I, we ride our Harley and just have a good time.
Thank you. And Mike Zimmerman, I think we somehow got over your slide, but Mike Zimmerman is a logistics expert, and he was logistics expert for the reactivation of the airplane. Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's see, I started out flying EC-130s, Compass Call. It's an airborne jamming platform. And then after did that for 5 years, then I luckily was up at Wright Pad as a captain, working in RE program office, a specialized management office, when we heard the SR was going to be reactivated, and my director asked if I wanted to take it. I said, sure. I have only heard about the SR on the radio when I was flying, so I definitely can do this. Long story short was my job was to find where the program had been buried back in 1990. At the original shutdown, they dispersed everything and put 6 airplanes into storage and all the parts, and my job was to bring everything back, bring the B model back into Air Force standards, find engines, tires, sensors, cameras, put fuel around the world. If it needed to go to the program, my job was to find it, buy it, contract for it, and sustain it. And that's what I did.
Thanks, Mike. It's just to show you also that I actually flew the airplane, so that's me on the left side, of course, with you notice all these pictures are old pictures. We were young and bulletproof at that time. We're not so young and bulletproof anymore, but anyway, still us. So the one thing I want to talk about is how hot the airplane gets. The sun is hotter than the SR-71, but that's about the only thing that's hotter. And Kelly Johnson and his design team had to design this airplane not only to go real fast, but also to be able to handle the incredible heat that's generated going that fast. So everything was designed for high temperatures. One other fast airplane is the Concorde. It's retired now, of course, but you'll notice the temperatures around the airplane is about 100 degrees centigrade, Mach 2. and they were talking about how hot the airplane got. The going 3 times the speed of sound is a different story, and a whole bunch of busy temperatures there, but 2 that I've highlighted. One is the front windshield of the SR-71. At Mach 3 cruise is 600 degrees Fahrenheit, on the inside pane of glass. The outside is hotter, but that's where we heated our tube food before we ate them. The back of the engine nacelle was about 3,200 degrees. The afterburner plume was about 3,500 degrees. It's real hot. It glows kind of orange. I used to like flying night sorties when I'd open the periscope up and look behind me, and you see these 2 orange lines that are like this, leading edge of the rudders. They're glowing orange just a little bit because it was so hot. So the heat is probably one of the biggest enemies that Kelly Johnson had to deal with. As we mentioned, for those of you who are fortunate enough to get in the cockpit, the suits in the cockpit are cooled by an air conditioner system that runs through the fuel control, the fuel tanks. So it works really well as long as you have sufficiently cool fuel in the tanks. Toward the end of a mission, before you descend to land or refuel, you're getting low on fuel and it's getting real hot because of skin friction. And so the cockpit starts to get warmer and warmer, and the suit gets warmer and warmer, and without even looking at the fuel gauge, you know it's time to come down. So anyway, 2 foods and drinks are via a check valve in the helmet. You put them right in your mouth, and you don't have to open up, your helmet. We always flew in the full pressure suit, which is back there in the corner, about 40 pounds worth, and I would never want to fly the airplane without the full pressure suit. It became part of the way of doing business. The cabin pressure was 26,000 feet normally, and your airline pressure for those who flew in here between 6,000 and 7,000 feet of cabin pressure. So that's a lot higher, and you have to pre-breathe for an hour of oxygen to denitrogenate your body and your joints. Usually it was not a problem in the SR, because it took 35 minutes or so from startup, taxi out, then you went to the tanker. So by the time you actually start accelerating, you're probably an hour and 10 minutes closed up with oxygen. So you're properly denitrogenated by then. Another fantastic Mach 3 airplane was the XB-70. Sadly, one of them crashed. They only have one left. It's at Dayton at the Air Force Museum. It flew a total of 1 hour and 48 minutes on Mach 3. The SR-71 would fly that long or longer on every mission. So, and when the XB-70 flew at Mach 3, it came down and they couldn't understand the paint was all gone. It had burned the paint off the airplane. It got so hot. SR, and people may have talked to you, largely built out of titanium from Russia. the Lockheed had figured out how to have a separate standalone company buy titanium from Russia under the guise of, we'll build some toys with it. They bought enough titanium to build 50 airplanes. So quite a bit of titanium. I guess money talks. There are some composites on the airplane, on the leading edges of the fuselage and around the wings. Same basic material the space shuttle heat tile was made from. So it withstands an awful lot of heat. The interesting thing is, even though the airplanes were had a lot of hours and were kind of old, every time it flew, it expanded and contracted, got hot, got cold, got hot, got cold. It was actually stronger. It's stronger now than it was when it was brand new because of the heat annealing properties of that cycling. So the airplane was designed to expand 6 to 7 inches in length and 2-3 inches in width. It's absolutely amazing. It was done in 22 months. And you look around this, it looks like kind of a pie-shaped series around the wings, and plastic materials along the fuselage chines, the edges. That's all composite material, and it aids in the somewhat stealthy ability of the SR. It's not invisible, but it looks like on radar, it looks like about a Cessna single engine airplane on radar. Of course, going 2,100 miles an hour. But anyway, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what that was. 80,000 feet, you're in the top 1.5% of the atmosphere. You have to be in the atmosphere in order for the engines to work and the flight controls to work. But you're up there real high. The sky is blue below you. It's dark purple where you are, and it's black above. And the curvature of the Earth is definite. You can look out and say, yes, Columbus was right, the world is round. For those of you who sat in the front seat, you realize it's kind of an old style, no glass in the cockpit, no glass computer panels, because that's what Lockheed had when they built the airplane. Also, they tested every single instrument and switch for temperature, for high temperature, and this worked. Computer screens don't work too well when it gets really, really hot. So this worked pretty well. So, the back seat was a little tiny bit cooler, not much, but a little tiny bit. It's only a few hundred degrees Fahrenheit. It had a little bit more, computer panels and things like that, but still everything was, all the controls were touchscreen because you're wearing spacesuit gloves. So it had to be designed so that you can feel it through gloves. So everything was designed for that. Notice the rear cockpit does not show anything aft of this picture because there's a couple systems there that we don't want to talk about. So anyway, if anybody has any questions, Doug Seufer is the one to talk to. See, notice a nighttime engine run, the back of the engine is glowing yellow. It's so hot. 3,200 degrees. The afterburner plume is 3,400 to 3,500 degrees. So it gets real hot, and it's the only airplane in the world that has unlimited afterburner time. So it's designed to operate real hot in full afterburner. Most other airplanes have a time limit, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever. The SR unlimited. I would like to throw it back to the panel. If anyone has any favorite stories, any war stories about the SR-71, go ahead.
I'll start. Is it on? Test? Okay. I'll start off with a funny story just to get the crowd excited about it. So, 1986, Mike and I, my front seat and I, were at RAF Mildenhall, flying the normal missions that we flew out there. The missions were anywhere from flying north to Murmansk to count the naval subs in the Russian Northern Sea, to the Baltic Sea, and around Eastern Europe. So one morning we go in for a morning briefing for a flight. And the briefings were intel briefing and weather briefing and how the plane is. And for some reason, the weather briefing, the captain that was given the weather briefing really went into a lot of detail, more than we needed and more than we ever expected. But we didn't think anything of it. We get suited up, we go out to the aircraft, we take off on time, we fly, I think it was a 6-hour mission that day, code 1, everything perfect. When an SR-71 lands from an operational mission, you taxi off the runway and immediately taxi into the hangar so the guys could download the sensors and the take. So we landed at Mildenhall, everything cool. We taxi off, and immediately as we taxi off, we're told to hold. Well, that was a first, absolutely first. We never held right off the runway after an operational mission. And then the barn doors, our hangar, which was, say, 100, 200 feet in front of us, opens up, and this guy walks out in a full chem gear. And Mike and I are talking on the intercom. What did we do? He walks up to the plane, and he's holding a Geiger counter. Now Mike and I are really scratching our heads. And he walks around the plane with a Geiger counter. So Mike and I were on our first TDY, say, I wonder if this is the last sortie we will ever fly out of Europe. What did we do? So the guy in the chem gear and the Geiger counter walks around the plane and then walks back to the hangar, and we get clearances to taxi in. So we taxi into the hangar, depart the plane as usual, and they come up to us and say, hey, we asked, what's going on? Well, there was an accident last night called Chernobyl, and we didn't know if you were going to fly through the clouds. So bottom line, they were willing to send Mike and I up, no thoughts about it, didn't tell us about it. We were fine to go through the clouds. But before any of the maintenance, commander, anyone else got close to the plane after we landed, they had to make sure it was clean. Next. Stories?
Mike Zimmerman.
Well, it's not a funny story, but we were asked the last couple of days during the reactivation program did the SR ever fly an operational mission? Well, the short answer was we wanted to, we were ready. Just 7 months after we started the reactivation program, but politics got in the way, and we were never tasked with a true operational mission. In April of 1977, there was an incident where an A-10 pilot out at Davis-Monthan decided to take an A-10 for a joyride, and he eventually last disappeared, I believe, up in Colorado, and the Air Force was trying to find this airplane because it had live ordnance on it. And they were looking and looking, could never find it. In our office, Big Safari, we have a lot of reconnaissance platforms. So we got word in, do you all have anything that we could use to visually go and look for that airplane? Well, I said, well, here's a possible chance. So I volunteered the SR to go image that whole area. We could probably do that in one pass, and we're already flying training sorties, so it was no big deal. We were turned down 5 times. We were turned down, and then finally it got to be pretty critical because they weren't having any success, and we got to go the go-ahead. So I contacted the Det 2, the operational squadron, and said, hey, we need to image these areas, and I believe we were given 27 high interest points to image, and we got like 24, 25 on the first pass. That's how good the airplane sensors were. We had upgraded the processing on the ASAR's radar, so we could do a 6-inch high quality radar picture, which could penetrate snow and stuff down. We could penetrate down about 6 inches. That's just the way that radar worked. And so we had everything set up. We imaged the whole area with the radar. We didn't find the A-10, but what we did find were avalanches. And these avalanches, the experts said, well, you need a sound wave 90 degrees to the ridge where the snow was packed on. And they drew out the lines and came back and came up with a extremely high probability of find location. And then we looked closer, and there were 3 high energy returns. Well, normally you get that down in the valley where people throw their, leave the pickup trucks that don't run anymore, or refrigerators, or washing machines, but you don't ever see those type of returns along a ridge line. So we gave those coordinates to the search headquarters, and they sent a helicopter up there. And first they said, nope, the SR people, they were just blowing smoke, didn't find anything. And it just so happens the helicopter came by the ridge line, and the observer caught sun glint off of a checklist page that was flapping in the wind. And that's how they found the A-10. So after that, I got called in by so many different people with lots of stars and eagles and, big expensive suits on to try to convince me that, no, we didn't find it. And the bottom line was they said, nope, you didn't find it. We never got credit for it. But in my book, yeah, we didn't actually find the A-10 or that checklist page, but we did find the site to go have the helicopter find it. And they had to go down to within 100 feet off the ridge line to even spot the checklist page. So I call that a really good assist.
Ed, what do you have?
Yeah, we had a lot of missions along the northern border of Russia, and keeping a close watch on the submarine ports along the northern border of Russia, along the Arctic Circle area. One of my early missions into that region, in the Barents Sea region, was in December. In December, the day-night line runs almost east and west along the Arctic Circle. And so my mission was with ASARs. We were taking pictures with ASARs, synthetic aperture radar, which could take pictures at night and through the weather. So we were not concerned with where daylight was. Well, we flew that mission, and during the mission, I noticed that we crossed the day-night line 6 times in less than an hour. So in less than an hour's time, I'd seen 3 sunrises and 3 sunsets. And so that was an unusual mission.
Dave Burns?
As maintenance, we work on the aircraft. We never have the opportunity to fly the airplane. But we did engine runs and all the parameters of the aircraft we handled. But one day we were tasked to do an environmental sound report in the area around our hangars for noise abatement. So they tasked my airplane, 956 here, because it's the trainer, because it wasn't flying on the schedule that couple days. And so I was told that morning, get it ready to taxi, just to taxi around and so forth. So we got the airplane all ready, panels up, and the Buick's ready. And the pilot who came out was Buck Adams, Captain Buck Adams. And I said, okay, Captain, go ahead and jump in the cockpit. We'll get you started, and you go on taxi out. When you're ready, come back behind the hangars, and we'll park you. And he said, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm going to launch you out. And he said, no, you're going to get in the front seat. I said, well, I can't do it. I'm not qualified to taxi. He says, I'm in the back seat. I'm an IP. He said, get in the front seat. So I give my headset and comm gear to my assistant, and he launched us out. And I started the engines. Captain Adams told me how to work the nose wheel steering. So I engaged nose wheel steering and started taxiing out. And so I got to taxi around on that open ramp for about an hour and a half. And we'd have to stop at different stages on the ramp. And they had these microphones all around us. We'd hold brakes and go to mill power and then come back down. And then they'd move the microphones a little bit and do another check. We did that for about an hour and a half. So then we taxied back around the end of the hangar, or the flight line, come back down behind the hangars and parked behind shelter 115. And shut down the engines. We chocked the aircraft, shut down the engines. Captain Adams got out, and he was at the bottom of the ladder, and I was finishing my checklist, and I got all done, jumped out of the cockpit, and came down the ladder. At that time, the air crews wore the orange flight suits, the Nomex flight suits. They were very distinguished in their suits. He had his overseas cap on, the blue cap on, and they also wore a black dicky. And on that dicky was a little embroidered Mach 3, the symbol, the Mach 3 flyer, was embroidered on the front of it to show you it was a Mach 3 SR pilot. So as I come down the ladder, he's standing there and he called me to attention. I'm kind of, what's going on here? So he reaches up behind his collar and he unbuttons that ascot. He pulls it out, he puts it around my neck, buttons it up. He said, now you're official. And to this day, I still have that ascot. It's a prized possession I have. And Buck was a great guy. He had the opportunity to fly the London to Los Angeles leg of the speed runs in 1974, and he flew from him and McCorrick, I believe was his backseater, flew from London to Los Angeles in 3 hours and 47 minutes. So he's a record holder. So Buck's a fine gentleman. He's retired as a major general and a super troop.
Steve Justice.
One of the things I want you to think about as you listen to the flight crews and maintainers of these aircraft, I want you to think about the team effort that it is in order to have these aircraft operate in the first place, but then operate effectively on top of that. Because when they launched, typically the objective was to launch to the second of brake release on takeoff, to be able to be over the exact spot that they needed to be to accomplish the mission with the sensors they had, which meant that the airplane had to be ready to go at that particular time, and that all of the work that led up to the airplane being ready to go had been accomplished. So the mission reliability of the Blackbirds is simply world class, and that's due to the people on the program. And I want you to remember that the next time you head to the airport and your flight is delayed because of a maintenance problem, and then you get to wherever you're going and your luggage isn't there, that meant that multiple people didn't quite do their job the right way inside there, that there were complexities of the aircraft that made meeting the schedule impossible, and the payload, in this case they used sensors, cameras, and electronic equipment. In the case of your commercial airliner, it's you and your luggage. You may get there, but your luggage doesn't. And it takes every piece of that for a successful mission, and that's what this airplane did on a repeated basis. Now, that in itself is an enormous accomplishment, but I want you to understand, in the backdrop of this, a mistake by these flight crews created international incidents and could create war. When you're covering the ground at 2,200 miles per hour, Mach 3.2, you're covering a mile about every 1.5 seconds. And Ed talked about missions that were flown along the Barents Sea, along the north edge of Russia or the Soviet Union. Being just a little bit off in heading, flying next to a border could take you over a border or into denied airspace that could trigger multiple international incidents. And over the course of the spy planes that had been the predecessor to the Blackbird, starting shortly after World War II and dealing with the Soviet Union, there were many air crews that had gone down inside the Soviet Union and were captured besides Frank Powers, and had remained their entire lives inside the Soviet Union as a result of trying to gather aerial intelligence. And so, knowing that backdrop, what these people accomplished, what this team accomplished with this aircraft, is absolutely incredible, because it gave presidents decision-making knowledge about how to handle situations, and knowledge is power. And so if decision-making requires on knowledge, and knowledge is power, and power came from the Blackbird, that tells you that, and the knowledge came from the Blackbird, then that knowledge and that Blackbird is a direct link to decision-making that was so critical for the United States in maintaining security. These men flew these incredibly dangerous missions on a repeated basis in an environment that wanted to kill them. The outside air temperature flowing over the aircraft, as you've seen, 500 to 600 degrees Fahrenheit, hotter than your oven can get at home, at temperatures and pressures that would rip them apart. Flying an incredibly complex machine that demanded their attention at all times on a mission that had no tolerance for error, whether it be in terms of timing or in management of the systems of the aircraft themselves. To me, the people, the pyramid of people that operated this aircraft are absolute heroes, and it's an honor to hang out with them.
Thank you, Steve. I'm going to piggyback on one thing you said that I failed to address earlier. Flying the airplane is just the tip of the iceberg. There are literally thousands of people who supported this airplane, from crew chiefs to Palmdale, to Warner Robins Air Force Base, to West Palm Beach, Florida, throughout the world, at the detachments in Okinawa and in England. Literally thousands of people. They all had to do their job exactly right and above the minimum required in order to have this airplane ready to fly. All we did was rent the airplane you know, to fly it. We were incredibly blessed to be flight crew in it, but we understood you cannot just get in the airplane and start the engines. You can't do that. It takes thousands of people supporting it. Thanks. Next slide. For anybody that was fortunate enough to get in the cockpit, as you look at it, the airplane was extremely difficult to fly. That's why it took a year of training in the airplane with a lot of experience before you get selected for the program. I'll get to that in a second. Anyway, difficult to fly. I'll get to that in a second. Anyway, we were selected on high performance background and a refueling experience, and hopefully maturity. In my case, not so much. And we had a week-long interview program, which weeded out some of the interviewees. In spite of this background, I can get to this now. We talked about how the airplane is made out of titanium and very special. We ended up, 50 airplanes were built of all categories: A-12, M21, YF-12A, SR-71, and the B model, and one SR-71C that was flown one time. And you go, not so much. Anyway, the bottom line is we lost 29 airplanes primarily during the experience gathering period. We ended up with 10 airplanes, A model airplanes, plus the B model airplane at the end when we all retired. So airplane obviously was very difficult to fly because everybody was selected to fly the airplane based on their flying skills, you know, and there was a lot of oops back in the day. Not so much toward the end, hopefully. The last portrait of the airplanes, you know, all 10 airplanes plus the B model at the very back side. That's the entire fleet of SR-71s that were left in 1989 before Ed did the record flight from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C. Not a lot of airplanes left to fly. 2 airplanes at Okinawa, 2 airplanes in England, and a few airplanes back at Beale. And I wanted to leave you with, this is America's Blackbird. It's not our Blackbird, it's your Blackbird. Your tax dollars paid for this airplane. So it belongs to the nation, really. And actually, now that it's in museums, it literally belongs to the people. Still the absolute fastest air-breathing airplane ever flown, and probably ever will be flown, although I don't know what the future holds. It's been our pleasure to present our favorite airplane to you. I'd like to entertain any questions you might have. Yes, sir.
Hello. Okay. You had mentioned that the instruments in the cockpit had to withstand high temperatures. How hot did the cockpit get while you were flying?
Do you know off the top of your head?
We usually kept the cockpit temperature inside the cockpit at about 68 degrees Fahrenheit, 70 degrees Fahrenheit. You may be referring to the temperature outside, just outside the canopy. I think it was around 550 or 600 degrees. Even though we were wearing a pressure suit and the thick gloves, you could touch that window for only a few seconds. It was like touching an oven window. So you knew it was really hot outside, but we had a good air conditioning system that kept the cockpit comfortable and circulated cooling air through our pressure suit, so we were comfortable inside the cockpit.
Was the instrument panel warm?
The instrument panel would have been about the same temperature as the air inside, so it was the instrument panel would have been about 70 degrees, 68, 70 degrees. I think early on you mentioned the instruments were tested at a high temperature, but they may have been tested at high temperature, but inside the cockpit they would have been normal temperature.
Yeah, normally extremely comfortable. The only time I got at all warm was when you got low on fuel toward the end of a mission. Then it get a little bit warmer, but you're right, Ed. Normally it's very comfortable in the cockpit. Did that answer your question? Okay, thanks.
Is this on? How did JP7 compare with JP1 like we use in airliners? That you use the volatility of the fuel and how the performance was it safe to handle?
Yeah, I'll actually. Do you want any handle that?
JP7 was basically a Jet A kerosene-based fuel, but it had additives to it, mixed with it, and different types of additives. They brought the flash point up to about 149 degrees Fahrenheit in that ballpark. So it wasn't dangerous. It was classified as a combustible, not a flammable. So when it leaked fuel, it made a mess. It wasn't dangerous to us. It didn't hurt your skin. There might have been some people a little sensitive to it, but I used to literally take baths in it because it leaks fuel so much, especially in Okinawa. But it wasn't an issue to us. We just made a mess on the hangar floor.
The JP7 was very thermally stable. In fact, you could take a bucket of JP7 fuel and throw a match in and it's not going to burn. In fact, the airplane could not use a normal spark igniter, had to use a chemical catalyst to start the engines and to light the afterburner. It's called TAB, triethylborane. So, you only had supposedly 16 attempts to either start the engines or light the afterburners on each engine. In actual fact, you probably had more, but that's what the counter started at. So it's kind of like Jet A, but it's not by a long ways. The tankers could burn unused JP7 for flying, but they could not burn it for takeoff and landing. So it was just not really compatible with their engines. Questions? Anything else? Yes, sir.
What was it like to put your pressurized suits on for the first time, and how fast did you guys adjust to moving around in them?
I'll handle that one, at least initially. Part of the interview process when you are accepted into the program in the first place, but part of the interview process was they put you in a spacesuit. Two technicians from spacesuit technicians help you into the suit because you don't know what you're doing at that point. You can't help yourself, and they put you in an easy chair after you're integrated into the suit, and you're observed. There's two technicians behind the seat, it turns out, and you're in the suit for maybe 45 minutes to see if you have a tendency to claustrophobia. And because you're right there, you're all closed up completely, and you got this thing right in front of your face, and you can't scratch your nose. You got spacesuit gloves on, and what they're doing is doing a report to see if you have any claustrophobia tendencies. I did, big time. However, I had to go to a happy place in my mind. I went to a beach. I closed my eyes. The ocean's lapping in, lapping out. I went to sleep. Thank goodness I did, because otherwise I was going crazy, because you can't open up. It's a two-step process to open your faceplate up. So once you start flying the airplane, you become extremely comfortable in the spacesuit. You know, you would never want to fly the airplane without being in the suit. It just you'd feel naked. Anything else?
One more thing about the pressure suit. This is interesting thinking back at it. So for the first 6 months of training, we had academics and simulators before we got into the actual suit. And as Tom said during the interview process, they brought you over to PSD to show you and everything. But then you didn't do anything with it. We had, during that initial IQ period, one simulator, just one, where PSD brought the suits over, and you got dressed and you flew the simulator in the suit. One flight, one simulator. And then the next time you were in the suit was your first flight. So as Tom said, after it was so comfortable after 1 or 2 flights, you know, it was like second nature. But when I think back out of it, it's amazing we only had one practice flight, one simulator flight, wearing the pressure suit.
I have to tell a funny story about the suit. So the rule was, once you were suited up, you didn't open the faceplate, right? Then that was forbidden. So Dick Gerard is a guy I worked with at the Skunk Works. I met him on the F-117 program, but he was an F-117 test pilot. And so I asked for a funny story from the Blackbird. He said, well, he'd just gotten up to Mach 3 and was getting ready to run test points, and all of a sudden, bzz, 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 there was a fly inside of his helmet, okay? And, you know, it's all sealed around your face, so there's no place for the fly to go except right around your face. Did any of you guys ever have a bug get in your... Okay, so Dick did, and so it's crawling around his eye, you know, his nose, his mouth, and stuff. And I go, Dick, you know, just kind of, you know, seriously. And he says, you know, you're up there for like an hour at Mach 3. And he says, Steve, I couldn't do it. And so it came down in altitude to do some tanking. So he broke the rule and opened up his faceplate and let the fly out. And then the fly got kind of seared up on the canopy seal up there. So fellow aviator, gave his life for his country.
One more thing about the suit and how they taught us that it was a lifesaver. So during training, we flew an altitude chamber ride in the spacesuit. And that's where they take you up in altitude in the chamber. So I was a captain then, and I remember sitting in the chamber, and the sergeants, the techs outside, you know, as I'm ready to go up, I'm sitting in the seat, in the suit, and they start bringing you up in altitude. And they're in the window, and you can see them. And you're passing 30,000 feet. You're passing 40,000 feet. So as you get passing 60,000 feet, to this day I remember that the sergeant, you know, from the outside says, okay, Captain Seufer, look at that flask of water we have sitting there. It started to boil. He said, if you were not wearing that suit right now, that's your blood. And then they took us up, I think, to about 90,000 feet and did a decompression, depressurizing. And your suit, you know, the Michelin man, when you lose pressure, the suit just inflates, and it just teaches you how much force you need to bring your arm down to the yoke, bring your arm down to the D-ring to eject. So one chamber ride proved to all of us the suit was there for us.
Speaking of chamber flights, remember there's one chamber flight we had, which was called heat chamber. It had a bunch of electrical heating elements next to us, and they'd take you up to like 75,000 feet, maybe 70,000 feet, and these heaters would be on, and it was specifically so that you would be confident in the suit. The suit's going to take care of you, even in extreme temperatures. Well, I go looking at it, and threads on my gloves are starting to smoke and burn. I go, okay, whatever. But it was comfortable in the suit, even with those high temperatures. Of course, your suit's not going to be exposed to those kind of high temperatures, but they just wanted to, I guess, demonstrate confidence in the suit. Anything else? Next slide. Next slide. What? Yeah. Okay, any additional questions for the panel? Yes, sir.
Hello. Hello. I had one more, or actually it was two questions. One was, where are all the rest of the parts for the SR-71 when you were doing the reactivation? Are they still all in storage? And then I had a second question, more of a story. What was the weirdest thing or the weirdest quirk about the SR-71 that you guys have, since you all flew different jets and did different experiences? What would be the weirdest thing that us civilians wouldn't know?
Well, unfortunately, all the parts that were not museum worthy, sensors, cameras, airplanes, start carts, engine stands, engines, that was all destroyed. The background on that, I tried to even bench what's called bench stock, just standard screws, nuts, bolts, that kind of stuff, because everything was bought with the original program under special access procedures. It was a classified program, so most things, unless it was a common radio that was used throughout DoD, if the airplane ever went down, you don't want the bad guys to try to figure out where the source of those parts were. So everything had fake part numbers, fake points of origin, and there was no decoder page. So when we got it, it was all unclassified. It had been in a warehouse for 5 years. And then when it was time to get rid of this, a couple of years prior, there was a big scandal out in the aviation world for counterfeit parts. Parts that were broke, they would show up and being sold, just below cost. And they found out they weren't flight worthy. So to prevent that, the Air Force and all of the aviation community said you had to show the pedigree for every part if you were going to use it. Well, we couldn't do it, and the Air Force and NASA, because they were under a time crunch, everything was shredded, destroyed, or just sold for scrap. It was a sad day, but the program fought back. The big shredders that they had out at the warehouse out at Barstow, California, they caught them on fire 3 times. So it was like one last salute to the people trying to bury the program.
So the bottom line is, sadly, the SR-71 can never, ever come back. It was a wonderful program when it lasted. Like a lot of things, nothing is forever. I wish this airplane was. Yeah.
You asked about unique a phenomenon with the airplane. One thing the airplane was famous for was a phenomenon called unstarts. The amazing inlet for the engine contributed, made the engine and inlet system about 80% more efficient than it would be without that amazing inlet. So the air coming in the inlet, the spike would withdraw as much as 26 inches during the acceleration to Mach 3.2, and the air coming into that inlet was compressed just due to the speed of the airplane, and the air going into the engine was at a pressure of 14.7 psi, so the engine thought it was at sea level really the whole time. And in the throat of the engine was the shock wave, so that it called the normal shock wave, so that the Mach 3 air going into the inlet was compressed and then slowed down so that it was subsonic on the engine side of that shock wave. Every now and then, though, that shock wave would get spit out the front, and that was called an unstart. And when that happened, you lose sudden loss of about 80% of your thrust. And it happened suddenly, and it felt like a sudden compressor stall. So you'd be flying along, and all of a sudden, boom, you know, and you get a sudden yaw, and sometimes it was severe enough to bang your helmet on the canopy. It was not dangerous. The computers would reset the spikes in the bypass doors, and in about 15 seconds, your spikes and doors would be reset, and you'd be off and running again. So it's not dangerous, but it always caught your attention, and it was a well-known phenomenon with the Blackbird, the unstarts. In the early days, they might get several unstarts per flight. When I first started flying the airplane in 1983, I was getting about one unstart every other flight. And during my years in the Blackbird, they kept refining the computer control, the software for the spikes in the bypass doors, so that by the time the airplane retired in 1990, we were getting about one unstart a year. So when it was retired, it was flying better than it really ever had before.
From a maintenance standpoint, it was pretty much a standard airplane. We just had different systems. That was fairly common. Hydraulic pressures were higher hydraulic pressures. They were at 3,400 psi instead of 3,000 psi. The fuel was a little different. We had to deal with that. And it's a big airplane. I worked fighters, and fighters are half the size of this thing. This thing's 107 feet long. You know, so as far as this maintenance standpoint, you had more people working around you. Where on an F4, you only maybe at the most two guys maintaining it. And if you doing maintenance, you might have a couple guys help come on, pull panels or open engine bays or something. This one, you had a whole bunch of people with you that worked under you or worked with you. So it wasn't anything really unusual, other than our tools were they had to be cadmium-free tools. So the tools we used on the aircraft were only dedicated to the SR. You cannot use them, take them home and use them on your car or anything like that, or you can't bring a tool from home and use it on the airplane because the cadmium in the plating would interfere with the titanium. It reacted to the titanium. Cadmium and titanium does not mix when you heat it, because it causes structural damage to the titanium. So our tools were isolated, and we only used our tools on the airplane.
Testing, there we go. Something unusual about the aircraft. So you hear about it being a secret airplane, but I want to talk for just a second about what that really means. About to develop something in secret, to test it in secret, and then to operate it in secret. Most of us would go home from a job at the end of the day, and our spouse would ask how the day went, and we'd complain about people at work, and we'd say this went right or this went wrong or something like that. The men and women that were part of this program would go home and be able to tell their families nothing about what they did. And when they would travel someplace, they wouldn't be able to, for work, they wouldn't be able to tell their families where they were traveling or how long they would be gone many times. They would have to carry secrets around with them for years or even decades because they signed a contract with the United States of America not to reveal defense secrets. And that you step back and you go, well, it sounds like movie and science fiction stuff, but I want you to understand that it hammers at your head a lot. These men and the women that worked on the program will say it was just part of life and you become normalized to it, but it's not. It's not a normal way to be, and it represents a sacrifice that people had to make in order to protect the secrets of the Blackbird, because it takes an adversary about 10% of the time and 10% of the money to develop a countermeasure for anything that you deploy, any measure you deploy. And so if you want to maintain the effectiveness of a measure like the Blackbird, then you need to protect its secrets. And so for literally decades, people have protected the secrets of the Blackbird. And now we can talk about it in retrospect, but I don't want you to, in any way, shape, or form, underestimate the burden that it placed on the people involved and the families that were involved in helping maintain the superiority of this aircraft for literally decades.
Any other questions? Okay. We have a gentleman up front.
What is SR-71 stand for? SR stand for, and question number one. Number two, you mentioned the radar signal is small, but can infrared detect it because of the high temperature?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, please?
What is a SR stand for? SR. Yeah. The second question is.
Excellent question. The original designation of the airplane was the RS-71, Reconnaissance Strike 71. President Johnson, when he announced the program, he inadvertently changed those first two letters to SR-71. So the Air Force says, we'll call it Strategic Reconnaissance 71. So that's how the SR started.
The second question is, you mentioned radar, there's a small signal radar, but can infrared detect it because of the high temperature?
Okay, excellent question. Yes, the airplane can be detected on radar, but it's not a 177-foot airplane. On radar, it looks like about a size of a Cessna, but it's not invisible. We wish it was, but it's a 2,100-mile-an-hour Cessna. So, it doesn't take the bad guys too long to figure out that little small radar return going that fast must be something besides a light airplane. So. Any other questions?
The 29 or 21 planes that were lost,
Right.
How many of them were due to, being shot down or any kind of, enemy action?
As far as we know, we don't know what happened to a couple of the A-12s. They just never returned. We think they probably crashed en route, we hope. But as far as the SR-71, no airplanes were lost due to enemy action. So. Yes, sir.
There were 32 SR-71s built and only 12 were lost, not 29. We had 10 of them out for active duty, but the rest of them were in storage. So when the airplane was deactivated the first time in 1990, some of those airplanes at that time were distributed to museums, and then when they went to the recall, or from 1995 to 1997, Z-Man and those folks brought those airplanes, and then when it was over with, the decision was made to distribute the rest of the airplanes that were around. That number was reversed, they had up there, because, yeah, we lost airplanes, but not 29. 19 is what they showed.
Thanks, Buzz. You stand corrected.
Test.
It's not.
One
Any
more.
other questions?
One more addition.
One more question.
One more addition to the question about airplanes lost. No Air Force crew member was ever perished during any of those crashes. So it's an amazing that no Air Force crew member was ever killed in an SR-71.
Excuse me?
Yes, go ahead.
Can each of you share a funny story or a story that brings a smile to your face when you think of this plane or your association with it?
I'll take that one. The thing that brings a smile to my face are all 3 emergencies I had in the airplane, because when I go back to the simulator training program, every simulator we had 4, 5, or 6 malfunctions to deal with. When you had emergency in the airplane, you only had one problem to deal with. And I had 1 landing at Beale and 2 landaways, but I felt extremely qualified and capable of doing that because the training program was absolutely second to none that I've had in 43 years of flying airplanes. Anybody else?
A funny story doesn't come right to my mind immediately. I'm sure I could think of one. But one thing that did bring a smile to my face, every time I flew the airplane and climbed out of that plane, I had a big smile on my face. It was just a joy to fly the world's fastest, highest flying airplane. And best of all, we felt like we had just done something really important for our country and for the cause of freedom. So it was always a great feeling of satisfaction, big smile on both our faces after every Blackbird mission.
Excellent. And to top it off, the only thing I would add, and I've already said it, is it's a collective effort of thousands, literally thousands of people to be able to fly one of these airplanes around. And we were just incredibly blessed to be able to do that ourselves. Next question, next slide. Well, I guess I don't have a next slide. So anyway, thank you so very much for attending. And if you have any questions, we're going to be around here. So, feel free to ask us anything you want. Thanks very much. We appreciate everybody coming out.